When my dad told me he was seeing someone new, I thought it was just another passing phase. He had been single for years after his divorce from my mom, and though he occasionally went on dates, nothing ever lasted more than a few weeks. So when he sat me down at the kitchen table and told me he wanted me to meet this new woman, I prepared myself for the usual someone nice, polite, but ultimately temporary. What I wasn't prepared for was the moment I realized that she was closer to my age than to his. Her name was Lila, and the first time I saw her, walking into our living room in a soft blue dress that looked like something straight from a college party, my heart nearly stopped. She couldn't have been more than a couple of years older than me, maybe 24 or 25 at most, while my dad was 47. I remember looking at her, then at him, and then back at her, wondering if I had somehow misheard everything and she was maybe the daughter of one of his friends. But then she leaned in, kissed him gently on the cheek, and smiled at me in a way that made it impossible to deny the truth. From the beginning, Lila seemed overly eager to win me over. She asked about my classes, about my favorite books, about what music I liked, as if trying to build a friendship instead of a stepmother-daughter type of relationship. I was polite, but something about the way she carried herself unsettled me. She laughed too loudly at my dad's jokes, touched his arm too often, and yet her eyes flickered toward me like she was checking if I noticed. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it felt like she wasn't just dating my dad, she was auditioning for something T first. I thought maybe I was just being judgmental. I was 19 at the time, old enough to know better but still young enough to feel protective over my dad. After all, he was happy, and that was rare for him. He'd worked long hours his whole life as an architect, always tired, always stressed, and now here he was smiling like a teenager. So I kept my doubts to myself, told myself that maybe the age difference wasn't the end of the world, and tried to stay neutral. But neutrality became harder as weeks turned into months. The longer Lila stayed, the stranger things began to feel. She started borrowing my things without asking, at first small items like a scarf or a pair of earrings, but then entire outfits disappeared from my closet only for me to see her wearing them out on dates with my dad. When I confronted her, she laughed it off and said, "Oh, I just thought you wouldn't mind since we're practically the same size." My dad dismissed it too, saying it was harmless, but it didn't feel harmless. It felt invasive, like she was trying to blur the lines between my life and hers. One evening, after they had been together for about 3 months, my dad announced that Lila would be moving in with us. I nearly choked on my drink. It wasn't just that I wasn't ready for her to become a permanent part of the household. It was the speed of it all. It felt rushed, reckless, almost desperate. But he looked at me with such excitement in his eyes, a kind of youthful glow I hadn't seen in him since before the divorce, that I couldn't bring myself to say no. I just nodded, pretending to be okay with it, even though a pit of unease settled in my stomach. The first week of her living with us was tolerable, but by the second week, I began to notice things that I couldn't ignore. She would stay up late, on the couch, scrolling through her phone, but the moment I entered the room, she would snap it shut like she had been hiding something. She began asking me strange questions about my mom, about why the marriage ended, and about whether my dad ever still talked to her. Once, I caught her in my room, not borrowing clothes this time but flipping through old photo albums of my childhood. She smiled when she saw me and said she was just curious, but the way she closed the album too quickly told me she wasn't being honest. There was one night in particular that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I was coming downstairs for a glass of water around midnight when I heard voices in the living room. I thought it was just my dad and Lila talking, but when I got closer, I realized my dad wasn't even home. He had gone on an overnight business trip. It was Lila's voice, low and almost trembling, and then another voice on speakerphone, male, sharp, and impatient. I couldn't make out everything, but I caught enough. "You said you'd handle it. He doesn't suspect anything. Just a little longer." My stomach dropped. I slipped quietly back upstairs before she could notice me, my mind racing with possibilities. Who was she talking to? What was she handling? And most importantly, what didn't my dad suspect? I lay awake the rest of the night, unable to shake the feeling that Lila wasn't who she pretended to be. The next morning, when I saw her making pancakes in the kitchen with a bright smile and humming a pop song, I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. But then I caught the way she glanced at me out of the corner of her eye, measuring my reaction, as if she knew I had heard something I shouldn't have. That was when I realized this wasn't just about an age gap, or about my discomfort with her being so close to my age. Something was happening beneath the surface, something my dad didn't know, and I was determined to find out what it was. The next few days after I overheard that late-night call, I couldn't look at Lila the same way. Every time she smiled, I felt like there was something hidden just behind it, something that wasn't meant for me or my dad to see. I tried telling myself not to overthink, that maybe she was just talking to a friend or a family member, but the way she had said he doesn't suspect anything echoed in my head like a warning bell. My dad remained completely oblivious, and if anything, he seemed more enchanted with her than ever. He started cooking her favorite meals, taking her on weekend trips, and even bringing her to his office events. He introduced her proudly as if she were some kind of prize, while I stood there biting my tongue, wondering if I should say anything at all. What bothered me even more was how Lila kept slipping into my world in ways that felt deliberate. She started joining me in the mornings when I studied, offering me coffee she brewed herself. She'd ask about my friends, what parties I went to, whether there were any guys I liked. At first, I thought it was a clumsy attempt to bond, but sometimes her questions were pointed, too personal, like she was collecting information instead of making conversation. Once, she even asked me if I ever thought about leaving college to try something different, her tone so casual it almost seemed harmless. But the way she studied my face told me she wanted a reaction. It wasn't until one Saturday afternoon that things really began to unravel. I was heading out to meet my best friend when I passed by the guest bedroom, the one Lila used for her things since she had moved in. The door was slightly open, and inside I saw her hunched over her laptop, speaking into her phone again. Her voice was low, hurried, almost nervous. "No, he hasn't figured it out yet," she whispered. "But the daughter, she's watching me. I need more time." My body froze. For a second, I considered barging in, but instead I slipped away quietly, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I didn't go to meet my friend that day. I sat in my car down the block, trying to process what I'd heard. He hasn't figured it out yet. The daughter is watching me. There was no way she wasn't talking about me and my dad. Whatever game she was playing, we were both part of it, and my gut told me it wasn't going to end well. That night, I finally worked up the courage to confront her, but I didn't do it directly. Instead, while she was in the shower, I went into her room. I knew it was a violation of privacy, but at that point, I felt justified. I searched through her drawers, her closet, even her makeup bag, but everything seemed frustratingly normal. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed her purse sitting on the chair. Inside, beneath her wallet and lip gloss, was a folded piece of paper. When I opened it, my hands started to shake. It was a bank statement, not hers, but my dad's, his name, his account number, and several recent withdrawals circled in red pen. She had no reason to have this, let alone mark it up like that. I quickly shoved it back into the bag when I heard the water shut off upstairs. My heart raced as I slipped back into my room, trying to act normal when she reappeared a few minutes later, in her robe, smiling like nothing was wrong. But inside, I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. The following week, I tried to keep a closer eye on her, though it wasn't easy. She was careful, always erasing her call history, always keeping her laptop locked, and never leaving her phone unattended. But I noticed she disappeared for long stretches in the afternoon, telling my dad she was running errands. One day, I decided to follow her. I told my dad I was studying at the library, then parked a few blocks away and waited for her to leave. She eventually drove off in her small silver car, and I trailed behind, keeping just enough distance so she wouldn't notice. She didn't go to the grocery store or the mall like she told my dad. Instead, she drove to a rundown apartment complex on the edge of town. I watched her get out, look over her shoulder, and then head inside one of the buildings. I sat there, in my car for almost an hour waiting, my nerves stretched thin. When she finally emerged, she wasn't alone. A man walked with her to the car, tall, sharp-featured, with a hoodie pulled low over his face. They didn't touch, but the way they leaned close while speaking made it clear they weren't strangers. She handed him something small I couldn't see what, and he slipped it into his pocket before walking away without a backward glance. I drove home shaking, my mind spiraling with possibilities. Was she cheating on my dad? Was she stealing from him? Or was it something even darker? Something I couldn't yet name. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her laugh echoing from the living room, the same laugh she used with my dad. Light and easy, as if nothing was wrong. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, asking myself over and over, how much should I tell my dad, and how much should I keep to myself until I had proof? Because one thing was certain: if I went to him with nothing but suspicions, he'd choose her over me. I had seen the way he looked at her, the way he glowed in her presence, and so I decided I needed to find out exactly what she was hiding, even if it meant risking everything. What I didn't know was that the truth was going to be far worse than anything I had imagined. Over the next few days, the weight of what I had seen pressed on me like a secret too heavy to carry. Every time I looked at my dad, I wanted to blurt it all out, to tell him about the mysterious man in the hoodie, about the bank statement in her purse, about the whispered phone calls in the middle of the night. But the thought of his face falling, of watching the happiness drain out of him after so many years of loneliness, kept me silent. I told myself that if I was going to shatter his world, I needed more than shadows and suspicions. I needed the truth, something undeniable. Lila, for her part, seemed almost too perfect. She was attentive, cheerful, the kind of girlfriend who remembered my dad's favorite meals and surprised him with small gifts, like a tie for work or tickets to a baseball game. If I hadn't known what I knew, I might have thought she was flawless. But every smile, every laugh, every affectionate gesture felt like part of a performance, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing a role and I was the only one who noticed. One evening, my dad invited me to join them for dinner at a fancy restaurant downtown. He said it was a special occasion, though he wouldn't say why. My stomach twisted at the thought of sitting across from them, pretending everything was normal. But I agreed because I wanted to keep watching her. When we got there, I sat in stiff silence as they toasted with wine, my dad beaming with pride. And then he dropped the news: he and Lila were officially engaged. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I stared at the sparkling ring on her finger, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Engaged. After less than 6 months, my dad was in his late 40s, about to marry someone barely older than his daughter. Someone I knew was hiding something dangerous. I forced a smile, my throat burning as I swallowed down the urge to scream. When we got home that night, I locked myself in my room and cried, not just because I was scared for him but because I felt powerless. I wanted to believe that maybe I was wrong, that maybe her secret wasn't as sinister as I imagined. But deep down, I knew better. The man in the hoodie, the late night calls, the stolen bank statements, none of it added up to something innocent. A few nights later, I got my chance. My dad had to leave for another overnight trip, and Lila stayed behind, claiming she had too much work to do. I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway, then slipped into her room again, this time determined to dig deeper. I checked her dresser, her purse, and finally her laptop bag. To my surprise, the laptop wasn't there, but a small black notebook was. My hands trembled as I flipped through it. At first, it seemed like a normal planner, filled with dates and reminders. But then I saw pages covered in numbers, account numbers, transaction amounts, and notes like transfer confirmed and verify balance. My dad's name appeared more than once. And then, near the back, a line that made my blood run cold. Once he signs, it's ours. I shoved the notebook back into place and closed the bag, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. She was planning something with his money. Maybe it was marriage, maybe it was something else, but whatever it was, my dad was her target, not her partner. The moment she came home, I felt her eyes on me, sharp and searching. "Quiet night?" she asked, her voice casual but edged with suspicion. I nodded quickly, mumbling something about homework, and avoided her gaze. But inside, panic was clawing at me. She was too careful, too calculating. If she realized I had been snooping, I didn't know what she would do. The very next day, I decided to tell someone, not my dad, not yet, but someone who might help me figure out what to do. I met up with my best friend, Jenna, at a coffee shop, and for the first time, I spilled everything. The calls, the man at the apartment, the bank statements, the notebook. Jenna's eyes widened with every detail. When I finished, she leaned in and whispered, "You can't let your dad marry her. She's obviously after his money." I wanted to agree, but something about the situation felt deeper than just greed. If it were only about money, why the secrecy? Why the strange man, the late night calls, the notes that sounded almost like instructions. It felt like there was another layer, something darker I hadn't uncovered yet. That night, when my dad returned from his trip, he looked happier than ever. He kissed Lila, told her he missed her, and then turned to me with a proud grin. "She's moving her stuff in for good," he announced. "This house will finally feel like a family again, a family." The word made my stomach twist, because, in that moment, I knew something he didn't, that the woman he was planning to marry wasn't building a family at all. She was building something else entirely, and whatever it was, my dad and I were at the center of it. But the scariest part wasn't what I had already discovered. It was the sinking feeling that I hadn't even scratched the surface yet. After that night, I couldn't shake the dread that everything was slipping out of my hands. My dad was convinced that Lila was his perfect partner, and he seemed deaf to any warning signs. He talked about the wedding constantly, about the honeymoon they might take, even about the possibility of selling the house to start fresh somewhere new. Every word tightened the knot in my chest, because I knew the more he invested in her, the harder it would be to pull him away. Lila, on the other hand, only grew bolder. She started taking control of parts of my dad's life that had always been his alone. She helped him organize his bills. She suggested selling some of his belongings because they were outdated, and I even caught her once looking at documents in his office. When I stepped into the room, she shut the folder so quickly, it made me flinch. She smiled sweetly and said, "Just trying to help him get organized." But her eyes gave away something colder. One night, unable to bear the tension any longer, I decided to dig deeper into her secret meetings. I convinced Jenna to come with me, and we parked near the same run-down apartment complex I had followed Lila to before. Sure enough, around 9 o'clock, Lila's silver car pulled up, and she slipped inside the building. This time, I didn't just wait outside. Jenna and I crept up the stairs, trying to stay quiet, and pressed ourselves against the wall outside the apartment door she entered. Voices drifted through the thin wood. I recognized Lila's voice, low and urgent. "He trusts me completely. Now, once the paperwork goes through, it's done." Another voice, male, the same sharp tone I had heard on the phone weeks earlier, replied, "Don't get sloppy. If she gets suspicious, it'll ruin everything." My stomach lurched. He wasn't talking about my dad, he was talking about me. Jenna grabbed my arm, wide-eyed, but I held up a hand for her to stay quiet. We leaned closer, barely breathing. Then I heard something that chilled me to the bone. "You'll get your share when it's finished," Lila whispered, "but don't forget, this isn't just about money." I pulled Jenna away before we could be caught, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might break my ribs. We ran down the stairwell, out into the cool night air, and didn't stop until we were back in my car. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, Jenna whispered, "What does she mean it's not just about money?" I shook my head, too overwhelmed to answer, but inside, the question burned. If it wasn't just about money, what else was it about? The next morning, Lila acted like nothing had happened, humming in the kitchen while making pancakes again. My dad walked in, kissed her cheek, and sat down at the table like we were living in some kind of perfect sitcom. I sat across from her, barely touching my food, wondering if she knew I had been there last night. She looked at me once, her smile holding just a second too long, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I knew then that I couldn't wait much longer. Whatever her plan was, it was moving fast. My dad mentioned an upcoming meeting with his lawyer about updating some documents, and my blood ran cold. The notebook had said, "Once he signs, it's ours." She wasn't just planning to marry him. She was planning to take everything. That afternoon, when she left the house for another errand, I went into her room one more time. This time, I wasn't just looking for clues, I was desperate for evidence, something I could use to stop her before it was too late. I searched through the closet, the drawers, and finally, beneath a pile of sweaters, I found a locked box. My hands trembled as I tried to open it, but it was secured with a small key. I almost gave up, but then I remembered the chain she always wore around her neck with a delicate charm. I raced to her jewelry dish, and there it was, the key. When I opened the box, my breath caught. Inside were documents, photocopies of my dad's bank information, life insurance policies, even a draft of a will. But that wasn't what made me drop the papers in shock. There were also photographs not of my dad, but of me. Candid shots, ones I didn't even know had been taken. Me walking to class, me sitting in the backyard reading, me driving my car. page after page of me, tucked neatly among the stolen documents. I stumbled back, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the entire box. None of this made sense. Why would she have photos of me? Why would I be part of whatever scheme she was planning? I stuffed everything back in place and locked the box, my mind spiraling. It wasn't just about my dad anymore. Somehow I was part of it too. Every creak of the house made me jump, every shadow felt like it was watching me. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of her standing over me with that same sweet smile, holding my life in her hands like it was nothing. The next morning, when I sat down at the breakfast table, she slid me a plate of toast and eggs with her usual cheery voice. But then she leaned in just slightly, her smile never fading, and said softly enough that my dad couldn't hear, "You shouldn't snoop in other people's things. It's not polite." I froze, my fork clattering onto the plate, and she just kept smiling. That was when I realized she knew. She had known all along. When Saturday finally arrived, I felt a nervous energy buzzing through me, and as I walked into the cafe, I immediately spotted the two of them sitting near the window. My father looked relaxed, sipping his coffee as if this were the most casual thing in the world, but Lila's expression gave away a tension I had never seen before. Her eyes flicked toward the door the moment I walked in, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I sat down opposite them, my heart pounding, palms sweaty, but my resolve firm. I took a deep breath and told them exactly what I had seen and heard: the late-night calls, the man in the hoodie, the notebook with my dad's accounts, and even the candid photos of me hidden among his documents. My father's face drained of color, his hands trembling slightly as he put down his cup, and I could see the conflict etched in every line of his face. Lila, on the other hand, simply crossed her arms and tilted her head, her expression a mix of annoyance and mockery, as if I were a child fabricating a story. She tried to spin it, claiming I had misunderstood everything, that I was reading too much into innocent conversations, but every word I spoke held him captive, forcing him to acknowledge the cracks he had been ignoring. Finally, my father, clearly struggling to process it all, asked me to step outside for a moment so he could speak with her privately. My stomach twisted, but I obeyed, walking out into the cold air and pacing nervously, my mind racing with what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. I waited outside for nearly half an hour, listening to the hum of the city, every passing car making my heart leap, until my father emerged alone. His face was pale, tired, and sad, and he told me that Lila had stormed out after realizing he was beginning to doubt her story. The way he said it, a mixture of relief and heartbreak, made me both angry and grateful. That night, he came home earlier than usual, sat across from me at the kitchen table, and admitted that deep down, he had known something felt wrong for a while but had chosen to ignore it because he didn't want to feel alone. I listened as he described the tug of war in his mind, the loneliness that made him blind to Lila's manipulations. Hearing him confess that broke my heart, but it also gave me hope, because it meant he was finally seeing things clearly. I realized then that sometimes even adults, even parents, can be blinded by their desire for companionship, and it takes someone else to open their eyes. For the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe our family wasn't completely lost. The road ahead would still be messy. Lila could come back, or worse, try to manipulate him again, but at that moment, I believed that telling him the truth had been the right decision, no matter how painful it was. And in a strange way, the fear and tension that had consumed me for months started to lift, replaced by a cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, we could heal from this together. A week after that conversation, the house felt calmer, but there was still a heavy silence that weighed on all of us. My father avoided mentioning Lila unless I asked, and every time her name came up, his voice trembled slightly, betraying the conflict he was still processing. Then, one evening, he came into my room holding a small envelope, with a confused look on his face. He handed it to me, explaining that it had arrived in the mail addressed to him, but without a return name. My hands shook as I opened it, and inside I found photographs of Lila sitting closely with another man at a bar, laughing and holding his hand as if they had been together for months. My father stared at the photos in shock, his mouth slightly open, and although it hurt to see him in pain, I felt a strange sense of relief. The evidence confirmed what I had suspected all along. Lila's intentions were never real, and she had been manipulating him the entire time. But just as we were beginning to process this, the real twist hit. Tucked inside the envelope was a handwritten note, not from Lila, but from the other man himself. He explained that he had been seeing her for almost a year and had only recently discovered she was living with my father, so he wanted to warn us both before she could hurt us further. Reading the note, I could feel my father's hands trembling again, but this time there was also a hint of relief in his eyes. The realization freed him from the last bit of doubt he had clung to, and within days, Lila's belongings were gone from our house without so much as a goodbye. The emptiness she left behind was palpable, but it also made room for something we hadn't felt in months. Trust. In the aftermath, my father and I grew closer, not in a forced way, but in an honest, vulnerable way that we hadn't shared in years. He began to ask more about my life, my feelings, my worries, and for the first time, it felt like we were truly listening to each other. I still carried some anger toward him for not recognizing the truth sooner, but I also realized he was human, flawed, and desperate for love like anyone else. The whole experience taught me that protecting someone you love doesn't always mean staying silent. Sometimes it means facing the uncomfortable truth, even when it risks breaking hearts, in order to save someone from something far worse. Though my father lost a girlfriend, he gained back the trust and closeness with his daughter that we both needed far more than any relationship with someone who was never really on his side. And in that quiet house, finally free from manipulation and deception, I realized that we could rebuild our family stronger, wiser, and more aware of the dangers of letting charm and false affection override our instincts.